The day I received that call, I thought I was going to lose everything. In reality, I was about to understand everything. I was at the peak of my powers, or at least, that's what I told myself. My agency, that was me. Every contract, every creative decision, every client dispute passed through my desk. I wore my exhaustion like a badge of honor, convinced that my sacrifice was the price of excellence. I was the central pillar, the architect, the chief firefighter. If I collapsed, everything would come crashing down. And that call was the beginning of the unraveling. A serious family problem, halfway across the world. Not the kind of thing you could sort out over a video call. I had to leave. Not in a week, not tomorrow. Now. Hanging up, my first instinct wasn't sadness or worry for my family. It was a cold panic about my business. How would it survive without me? 6 hours later, I was on a plane, leaving behind a hastily briefed team and a note on my desk, "Hold the fort." For the next 6 months, I was unreachable, completely cut off from the world. And that's when the unthinkable happened. My business didn't just stay afloat. It boomed. This is the story of how my forced disappearance gave birth to the invisible CEO model, a system that transformed my gilded cage into a truly autonomous machine. In this video, I'm going to tell you, step by step, how I accidentally discovered the 7 pillars for building a business that literally runs and sells itself. Stick around until the very end, because the last step changes absolutely everything. Chapter 1: The Shock of Emptiness. The first few weeks were torture. I imagined chaos, clients leaving, projects going off the rails, employees panicking. Each day without contact was agony. I was the CEO, the leader, the only one holding the vision. My absence had to create a void, a black hole sucking everything in its path. My identity was so intertwined with my company that my physical absence made me feel like a ghost. Who was I without problems to solve, without decisions to make? This forced distance confronted me with the most terrifying question for an entrepreneur: what if my company didn't need me as much as I thought it did? This question obsessed me. I felt useless, stripped of my role. I had spent years building this machine, and now, I was thousands of miles away, unable to turn a single crank. It was a brutal lesson in humility. My team's radio silence, which I interpreted as the calm before the storm, was in fact something else entirely. But I didn't know that yet. Chapter 2: The Illusion of Control. When I finally managed to get back in touch, 6 months later, I expected the worst. I called my right-hand person, a lump in my throat. I anticipated apologies, disastrous reports. Their answer left me speechless. Not only was everything fine, but revenue had increased by 30%. 30%. They had signed 2 of the biggest contracts in the company's history. Without me. My first reaction was a mix of relief and of vexation. How dared they do better without me? That's when I understood my first fundamental mistake: I wasn't the engine. I was the bottleneck. Every decision I centralized, every validation I demanded, every time I said, "Wait, I need to check," I was only slowing the machine down. I thought I was controlling quality, but in reality, I stifled initiative. My team, made up of brilliant people I had recruited myself, spent their time waiting for me. My forced departure had liberated them. They no longer had a choice, they had to make decisions. And they made them, excellent ones. The biggest obstacle to my business's growth was me. And that's a revelation that hurts, but is absolutely necessary. Chapter 3: The Silent Foundation. How did they do it? It wasn't magic. Upon returning and analyzing the situation, I realized that, unbeknownst to me, I had laid the foundations of an autonomous system. This is the 3rd pillar. I was obsessed with documentation. Not for delegation, no. At the time, it was purely out of selfishness. I wanted things done my way, even if I wasn't there to say so. So I had created standard operating procedures, SOPs, for almost everything. how to onboard a new client, how to manage a project from A to Z, how to respond to a complaint. Everything was written down. I thought I was creating manuals for my clones. I had in fact created the source code for Autonomy. My team didn't have to reinvent the wheel. When a situation arose, they didn't need my opinion, they needed the manual. What I had designed as a control tool became their tool for freedom. They even improved these processes in my absence, because they were on the ground, facing reality. The lesson is simple: don't document to control, document to liberate. Every process you take out of your head and put on paper is another brick in your fortress of autonomy. But beware, having plans is useless if no one is able to read and apply them. And that's where the next pillar comes in. Chapter 4: The Army of Generals. I've always had a good instinct for recruiting. But I was making a classic mistake. I recruited soldiers, brilliant implementers. I gave them orders, they followed them perfectly. My absence changed the dynamic. My lieutenants had to become generals. They no longer waited for orders, they gave them. They had to develop a strategic vision, manage budgets, take risks. Why did it work? Because, without realizing it, I had recruited people with an owner's mindset. People who cared about the company as if it were their own. I simply had never let them take the wheel. The invisible CEO model doesn't work with mercenaries. It demands a culture of radical accountability. Everyone must be the CEO of their own position. When I returned, I saw a transformed team. They no longer asked me what should we do, they told me here's what we've done, and here's what we're going to do. The secret isn't to hire people to give them answers, but to hire people capable of finding the answers themselves. Autonomy isn't decreed, it's cultivated by giving power and trust to those who deserve it. But even with the best army, you need a constant influx of new recruits, or in our case, new clients. Chapter 5: The Sales Machine Without a Salesperson. This was my greatest pride and my greatest anxiety. I was the best salesperson in my company. I was the one who signed the big contracts, who charmed prospects, who nurtured the network. I was convinced that without my charisma, sales would collapse. Another mistake. During my absence, the team had to find a solution. Unable to replace me, they replaced the method. They systematized sales. They analyzed everything I did instinctively and transformed it into a reproducible process. They created automated sales funnels, produced content that answered client questions before they even asked them, and implemented a prospect qualification system so effective they were only speaking to almost certain customers. In short, they built a machine that generated opportunities 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The machine was never tired, never in a bad mood, and it didn't need me. They understood that the business shouldn't depend on a star salesperson, but on a star sales system. It's a total paradigm shift. Your goal isn't to become the best salesperson, but to build a machine that sells better than any human. And the craziest part of it all is what happens next. Chapter 6: Becoming Useless to Become Indispensable. Upon my return, I experienced an existential crisis. The machine ran perfectly without me. I was useless. I could spend my days without receiving a single urgent email. No one knocked on my door anymore to put out a fire. It was unsettling. I almost fell back into old habits, retook control, just to feel important. And then I understood the ultimate paradox of the invisible CEO. By becoming useless in daily operations, I finally became indispensable where no one could replace me, the vision. Freed from the urgent, my brain could finally dedicate itself to the important. Where will the company be in 5 years? What new innovations should we explore? How can we reinvent our industry? My role was no longer to push the machine, but to point it in the right direction. I went from being the captain of a paddle boat, exhausted from rowing, to the captain of a ship, eyes fixed on the horizon, the helm guided by an autonomous crew. That's the true freedom of the entrepreneur. It's not about doing nothing, It's about finally having the time and mental space to do what only you can do, dream up the future. And this transformation has a final consequence, the most spectacular of all. Chapter 7, The Final Sale, The Ultimate Test. About a year after my return, an acquisition offer arrived. Not a small offer. A life-changing offer. At first, I was skeptical. Buyers would want to keep me, tie me down with multi-year clauses to ensure a smooth transition. That's the norm. The due diligence process, an in-depth audit of the company, began. Experts picked apart everything: our finances, our processes, our contracts, our team. I prepared for weeks of interrogations. But the most crucial questions were never asked of me. They posed their questions to my directors, to my project managers. They studied our SOPs, our automated sales systems. And then, the verdict came down, and it stunned me. One of the lead auditors said this phrase that I will never forget: "What's incredible about your company is that it absolutely doesn't need you. That's the most valuable asset you've built." They weren't buying a company that depended on its founder. They were buying a machine. A perfectly well-oiled machine for generating profits, documented, with a team of top-tier operators. The negotiation over my transition period lasted 5 minutes. They barely needed one. My business sold itself, for a significantly higher value, precisely because I had become an option, not a necessity. I had passed the ultimate test. I had built an entity so autonomous that it had its own value, completely decoupled from my personal involvement. In conclusion, this ordeal taught me everything. The goal isn't to build a business that makes you indispensable, but to build a business that makes you free. This involves accepting that you are often the main bottleneck, creating systems that replace you, hiring and empowering leaders, and building a sales machine that never sleeps. The invisible CEO model isn't a utopia. It's the result of intentional design, a desire to build not a job for oneself, but a true asset. An asset that can prosper, grow, and even be sold, without you having to be in the engine room. That's the ultimate goal of the game. True wealth isn't the money the business generates, it's the choice it offers you. The choice to stay, the choice to leave, the choice to create something else, knowing that what you've built will continue to thrive, with or without you. Subscribe for daily business tips. Don't forget to subscribe.